Okay. Good evening, everyone. Before we start, I have a small announcement to make for our respected co-host and keynote speakers for today. Once you are a co-host, so I request you to please not leave the meeting as it may end the meeting for all of us. So now, uh, I, Kritika, on behalf of Red Lantern Analytica, heartily welcome you all to the final session of 3-day virtual conference, the Siang Dialogue 1.0. For the last 2 days, we had an in-depth and insightful discussion about the Northeast region of India and the strategic scenarios at play. Our dialogue is named after the Siang River. Siang is the most important river in Arunachal Pradesh, which forms the main tributary to the Brahmaputra river system. Siang River has been the source of folk tales, folk songs, and folklores of the people living along the Siang Valley since time immemorial. It holds great ecological, cultural, and economic significance for the eastern Himalayan region. It is also associated with Tibetan Buddhism and is considered sacred by many. Siang is a symbol of Arunachal Pradesh and the northeast of India. The session 3 is called the Tawang Translation. Tawang received its name from a legend. Ta means horse and Wang means chosen. Tawang houses one of the most sacred monasteries in Vajrayana Buddhism called Tawang Ganden Namgyal Lhatse, founded by Merag Lodroe Gyamtso under the direction of His Holiness the 5th Dalai Lama in year 1680 and 1681. The name of this monastery means the celestial paradise of the divine side chosen by the horse. Hence, the name Tawang, which means horse chosen. Tawang is the westernmost district of Arunachal Pradesh and borders Tibet in north and Bhutan in southwest. In the culture of Tawang, Tibetan Buddhism has survived for ages and progressed due to its essence. Furthermore, today's session is titled Tawang Translation because Independent Tibet and Arunachal Pradesh have a sacred tie as His Holiness the 6th Dalai Lama was born in Tawang in 1682. Today, focusing on this region, our panel of experts is going to discuss the occupation of Tibet by People's Republic of China and India's support to the Tibetan cause. And what can be a more appropriate day to talk about and call out the state-sponsored human rights violation than the World Human Rights Day. With this, I would like to call our chief guest for the session, Dr. Anjit Sen. Dr. Sen has worked for 25 years in the digital, television, and print industries in India and abroad. He has done a master's in journalism studies from Cardiff University, United Kingdom, and has received an honorary doctorate from the American University, USA. He is an associate professor at Bennett University and also has published a book titled India and Its Neighbors, Problem and Prospect. Oh, sir.
Good evening, Craig. Thank you very much for this invite, and thanks to all of those who are present today, including our honorable guests, Mr. Tenzing Lakshay, Dr. Soumya Avasthi, and Mr. Shweng Dorji. Good afternoon to you, rather good evening now. Well, from this perspective, I would just like to say my journalistic, because I would rather not make a statement of sorts, but more to do with the experiences that I have undergone and the way it has been perceived, because the entire part of my childhood I spent close to Tawang, not in Arunachal though, but close to Tawang definitely, because it was a few hours distance from my state in Assam. And going back exactly a year back when the Indian forces successfully repelled the Chinese invasion in the Yangtze River in the region, thanks to the tactical deployment of our forces. And at the same time, it has been that it's always kind of a Ludo game that has been going on in that in this particular region all through. It's not just about any violence that is taking place or any kind of a way to propagate it further is a way that China has always taken up in the past. But at this juncture, it's very important from an Indian standpoint that what the government has done very well, I would say, right at the start, is by promoting tourism in the state, because I think for a long time it was lacking, and that's something which definitely has added something back to what Tawang always stood for, as we used to always kind of note that even in our childhood. Now, by setting up hotels, restaurants, and of course the homestayings and everything, but especially the marathon and the National Tug of War Championship, which was held recently, I would say that definitely added the color, because at the end of the day, what we perceive, not just from a global point of view, but also from within our country, is the fact that Arunachal is always, if I speak to somebody west or somebody down north or south, it has always been, oh yeah, but we have to, if we want to go there, we have to kind of take permits and stuff like that and go over there. But at the same time, it's important that an integral part of India will always remain an integral part of India, come what may. Now, of course, China has Tawang up in its line of assertion, of course, because the ethnic link between the cross-border communities, it could be actually, they would try to use it to whip up, any future Tibetan uprising, and that's the reason why they have been kind of moving up and down the corridor, sometimes up the corridor. They're changing goalposts, but remember, the field is going to be the same. And from that perspective, strategically speaking, it has always held a big importance. And from a foreign policy perspective, because that's what I specialize in, we have always kind of held a very straightforward line of thought. But what I think is essential at this juncture is, the way the Indian government reacted to do with the when China released a map where villages of Tawang, lambasted China left, right, center, saying that they because they say that they feel secure, because when I was there myself, they told me they feel secure because of the Indian Army, the government, and it's all going very normal. I mean, it's not that it's nothing to do with the fact that at the end of the day, the cultural and educational support that the Tibetans have got, of course, who are based in India, and the diaspora so to say, the people-to-people ties have blossomed, and Tibetans are now getting more and more integrated into various aspects of the Indian society. So from that perspective, it's not about the autonomous kind of a gesture that is normally postured, but it's very important that China should know where its boundaries lie. Never try to cross the border just because you want to cross it. Because at the end of the day, what you faced back in 2000, in fact last year, you're going to face it back in a much harder way if ever China tries to do that again. Because this time the Indian Army is not just Indian Army from that perspective, but diplomatically, I can assure you, diplomatically, they are going to be constrained to do so under any circumstances. And remember, trade is a small aspect which is still there. So from that perspective as well, it's just not possible right now. And people may say, okay, it's drudging on, and the more this kind of a thing to do with border issues drudges on, India is slowly losing its ground. But that's not the case, because diplomatically speaking, we are very well entrenched now, and it's a very clear-cut way of the way that it has been portrayed so far by the Indian Foreign Ministry officials as well. And from a strategic point of view, of course, the way Beijing might claim whatever, 90,000 square kilometers of the Arunachal territory, blah, blah, whatever it is. But at the end of the day, those invented names are not going to stick at all, because those are not going to be recognized from that perspective. And it's not just India now, because the United States has, because of this appointment of the special coordination for Tibet issues. China, of course, criticized that assertion, saying that, why are you doing this? But he was told it very clear, you should not interfere in the selection of the Dalai Lama's successor, because that's what Washington clearly asserted. And from that perspective as well, I think it's very important that it's the way the Indian government is making its inroads right now, the way we are watching Arunachal Pradesh in not just, I'm not talking about from a society perspective, but even the modes of transmission that's to do with the media side. From a media perspective also, it's gaining more and more importance as we go along, because this was never the case even 20 years back. And that's something which definitely, has opened the eyes of people living in other parts of the country where they have just heard about the state, but they don't know anything much about it. And they only hear the state only when there's a talk to do with China. But that's something from, if I'm talking, because I'll speak from a diplomatic perspective. So from that perspective, it's the cultural, the social ties that have been done by the Indian government within the country, and of course the way most of our friends, so to say, not neighbors I'm talking about only, but more from the perspective of friendly countries. They have, of course, always supported us in this venture, barring a few, of course. But at the end of the day, it's very important that whatever they may call it at Southern Tibet, there is nothing called something like that, because it is, and it always and forever will be known as Arunachal Pradesh, an integral part of India. That's what we have seen, because media perspective wise, when I had been there to do reporting, or when I have done reporting for global news channels across, for talking about Arunachal Pradesh and China, it is all earlier, maybe 20 years back, 25 years back, it used to have a kind of a quotient where 60% would go to China and 40% in India's favor, but it's completely changed now. It's more to do with a 80-20 ratio, if I can say, from that perspective, because the foreign media as well has been able to understand the exact sequence of events and how things have developed over the period of the last 20 years. I'm not going back again, because if you go tread into the history, of course, then the history is there, but there's no point of talking about history at this moment, because that's part and parcel of the thing which people would already know, but more to do with the fact that what's happening currently. Because from that perspective, the steps taken by the Indian government are definitely good, and the way they're progressing, not just in Arunachal Pradesh, but waking the word up down in other parts of the world where we have good diplomatic connections. I think that's definitely making its mark, despite some global changes that are happening from a diplomatic perspective. So I would just like to kind of say that no, it's not about people. Some people say that India is always credited with the one China policy, but some are saying that we need to relook at Tibet. And why must India follow the rules while others don't? And from that perspective, I would say that some people are saying that shouldn't India declare the old status of Tibet and drop that one China policy? Well, that's something which the government will, of course, discuss, and that's their decision. But from a personal point of view, I think keeping the diplomatic relations intact with whatever is going on around in case of bilateral and multilateral affairs, I would say here that if need be, I would also propagate for a need to relook at Tibet from that perspective. And it's only not that it can be recognized as something, because from that perspective, it has always been the case that they have, when their news agency, for example, the Xinhua news agency out there across the border, they have always empaneled the fact that it's part of our country, and it's not just in maps, but also while they speak in their foreign policy, in their foreign briefings as well. Now, that's something which is definitely not taken in good light, not just from an Indian standpoint, but also by quite a few other countries. And I can assure you one thing, that from a foreign policy perspective, it's going to be nailed down deep and within. And India will definitely, the way we have been progressing and the way we have seen Tawang grow, for example, as I said, from my childhood itself, I must say that I'm proud of not from a cultural perspective as well. I'm proud of the dances. I'm proud and really proud of the food that, I love it. So from that perspective, it's something. It's an integral part of the country, and it's not just about the way I spoke about the Tibetans getting along with the Indian fold, and it's no way that you just kind of blabber about taking over, by changing maps or giving out those assertions which are of no consequence in the global market at all, currently speaking. So I think there are other speakers and more distinguished speakers, because I spoke more from a journalistic perspective, because since I've covered the area, and right now also I'm working with the diplomacy team as well. So from that perspective, I would just like to reiterate that not just Tawang, but the entire state of ours in that Arunachal Pradesh that we talk about, you can remove it from the maps, but you can never remove it from the geography. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And you have shared a very close observation of the area as well. And I'm very sure that our respected participants who have joined us, they must be having many questions. So we'll be having a separate question and answer session once all the addresses of our panel members are over. Moving on to the next speaker, we have Tenzin Lakshay La, who is the spokesperson of Central Tibetan Administration. He is an avid observer of China-Tibet issues for over 20 years. He has worked with the Department of Information and International Relations, India-Tibet Coordination Office, and the Bureau of His Holiness the Dalai Lama and the Tibet Policy Institute. He constantly highlights the critical situation of Tibet and the imperatives to resolve the Sino-Tibet conflict in the interest of larger humanity through his work. I'll now like to invite him for his address. Over to you, sir.
Thank you so much. And first of all, I would like to thank Red Len Analytica for giving me this opportunity to speak about Tibet. In fact, it's a Siang dialogue. We know what is Siang. It's one of the tributaries of Brahmaputra, in Western Tibet. And the concerned topic right now is about occupied Tibet by the People's Republic of China and India's support for Tibet, for Tibetan cause. There's no doubt for over 6 decades, when His Holiness came to India as an exile, as a refugee. In 1959, right after His Holiness came to India and sought refugees, right, Jayaprakash Narayan, the great Indian socialist leader, right, was the face of the Indian movement in showing solidarity for the Tibetan support. Right at that moment in 1959, all Indian public supported Tibet for the last 60 years. And there's no need of introduction about Tibet issue to the Indian masses. Though, when we go to different cities, different towns, when we talk to many people, even among the strategic communities, even among the leaders, still we need to talk about Tibet issue. There's very much a need of a time to talk about Tibet issue, not for the sake of Tibetans, but for India's interest. Indians need to understand about Tibet issue. So therefore, as His Holiness, this today is the right moment for us to discuss about Tibet. We are celebrating the 34th anniversary of His Holiness conferment of Nobel Peace Prize to His Holiness Dalai Lama. And we are also commemorating the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The world talk about human rights. World talk about values. World talk about justice. World talk about equality. But Tibetan people, for the last 60 years, are deprived of the basic human rights inside Tibet. But when we talk about Tibet, right, many Indians are very close to Tibet by heart. many Indians, they always raise their hand by showing solidarity for Tibet. They always sympathize with Tibet issues. Why? Because Tibet was not a distant, far away, distant neighbor. Tibet was not something which is far away from the souls of Indians, but in Tibet and India are very close for millennia, for centuries, but not just having a sharing of borders, geographical borders, but also sharing culture, history, Buddhism, language. There are so many distinct issues which made India and Tibet connected for thousands of years. Therefore, over the years, we've been calling ourselves, the Tibetans, as Chela, and regarded India as our guru for centuries. So therefore, now the issue is when the Tibetans considered ourselves as Chela and India as our guru, and the guru is having a problem. Guru is facing a problem under the Chinese male violence. So is it a moral responsibility of Indians to support Tibet, the Tibetan cause? Yes, sympathy is there. The emotions are high. But for the last 60 years, even if there's a high of emotions, even if we have 1.4 billion sympathies on our shoulder, the issue still remains unresolved. So therefore, now, as a Tibetan, I'm not begging for solidarities. I'm not begging for supports for the Tibetan cause. But it is very important for India to understand that the survival of Tibet is very much relevant to the survival of India in the future. As just a few days back, His Holiness has given a statement on the 75th anniversary of the Universal Human Rights Day, and His Holiness talks about we need effective international action to address global issues for the perspective of oneness of humanity and form a profound understanding of deeply interconnected nature of one country or one world. Now we live in a global heart. If Tibet suffers, the world suffers. There's nowhere that the only Tibetans will suffer. India suffers. And the history proves. But right after China came and occupied Tibet, China became the immediate neighbor of India. And soon after that, there was a war. Still, the borders are disputed. Still, we witnessed Galwan, we witnessed Dogdam, we witnessed incursions and there are trans-aggressions all over the borders. So therefore, when Tibet was free, hardly there are border security personnel all around the borders. They used to say that somewhere around 74 border personnel are guarding the whole border of Tibet and India. Now, how many Indian troops are guarding the borders? How many crores of rupees are spending on the borders? So therefore, I think Tibet is very much relevant for India's security and India's survival in the future. And the Tibetan cause is a just cause. We talk about truth. India talked about Satyam Vijayade. We also talk about truth, prevailing truth. But over the last so many years, under the leadership of His Holiness, the Tibetan cause is being so much connected with the just and the truth. So much so that the Chinese are also feeling anxiety and fear of losing Tibet because they don't have a ground of truth to legitimize their control over Tibet. If you look back over the recent past, China claimed that Tibet was part of China since 7th century in their official records, in their first white paper in 1992. Over the recent past, they have gone down to 13th century, not the 7th century, by talking about the Mongol Khans. Now, under Xi Jinping, China is saying that Tibet is part of China since time immemorial, time antiquity, unrecorded history, because China do not have a base to legitimize their control over Tibet. Their only policy and their gesture and postures are all male violence, belligerent, and aggressions. Somehow, over the many years, many people thought that, many people talk about Tibet as being a buffer. And even now, people are also talking about buffer between India and China. But somehow, as being a Tibetan, we don't want to remain as a buffer, a standstill over there, not letting the two great nations come together. We are the bridge. We practice Buddhism, which comes from India. And we behold those principles of Buddhism and the philosophies of Buddhism. The canons are all being there, well preserved for over centuries. Nowhere in the country, in the world, that the Tibetans have preserved those canons, well preserved for centuries. That is the heart of the Tibetan culture. And that is very much part of Indian culture. Somehow, going back to the civilizations, let me also talk about these issues, because many people thought that that Tibet issue might be irrelevant, or even in the past. When we talk about great Indian civilizations and Chinese civilizations, many people thought that Tibet was not relevant in these civilizations, great civilizations. But let me be the one to tell you that Tibet is the lifeline for these two great civilizations, because in India, the Indus River flows from Tibet, originates from Tibet. And the great Indian civilizations, Indus Valley civilizations, flourish at the bank of Indus River. If you go to China, the Chinese civilization, the Yangtze rivers, right? The civilization flourished along the Yangtze rivers. Even the Yangtze River flows and originates from Tibet. If the Tibetan rivers are not being there, then where are the civilizations which they've been very proud of? So Tibet was the lifeline in the past and in the future. But Tibet can become the bridge between the two great civilizations. As of now, when you talk about the geopolitics, when you talk about those issues between India and China relationship, it became so competitive, full of mistrust. The relationships are not going well. Even after the informal summits, there was so much of border disputes. So much so that there are frictions happening between both sides. Why? Should we anticipate such frictions even in the future? So how can it be resolved? So therefore, what we felt is, as His Holiness has long time said, in 1987, when he promulgated, His Holiness says that the first plan of the 5-point peace plan for Tibet is make Tibet a zone of peace. Make Tibet be demilitarized. The Tibetan plateaus are heavily militarized on both sides, that they are clashes, there are mistrust, there are so much of things happening. So therefore, I think it is very important for Indians to understand that the Tibet's survival itself is very much according to India's survival. Again, sometimes I used to be an alarmist because we have to look for the future. Past is forgone. We cannot change the past. But learning through the mistakes of the past, we can change the course for the future. And in the future, if in case, okay, presuming, hypothetically, looking into what's happening inside Tibet, the climatical changes, the rise of temperatures. The scientists are saying that the temperature rise in Tibet is twice more than any other cities in the world. And we have a recorded 46,000 glaciers in Tibet. And we have around more than 10 different rivers close to different countries, downstream countries. Now, assuming after 30 years, the glaciers are melting, the glaciers are retreating right now. Now, 30 years from now, if there's no glaciers, now imagine where will the Gangotris, where will the Satluj, where will the Indus be, where will be the, talk about Siang rivers, Brahmaputras, where will all this Brahmaputra be? So therefore, it is very relevant for Indians to think about Tibet. Tibet's ecology is disturbing, it's very fragile, and China has been putting so much of pressure on the Tibet ecology, so much so that it became so normal inside Tibet, having landslides, mudslides, floods, earthquakes, became so common these days. Not just in Tibet. Look at the Himalayan regions. Dr. Anjit, you are from Assam. So Assam, we used to know that every year there's a flood. Every year. But not in any other states. But now you will get flash floods in Ladakh, you get flash floods in Himachal, you get flash floods everywhere on the Himalayan belts. Why? Because there is a change of climates. So therefore, it's really disturbing in the future if it's not being checked. So who should check it now? The people of the free world have the voice to talk about, because it is very much relevant to your own survival. So I will not talk about it in detail because it's limited time. But somehow, we need to also think that supporting Tibet is not just for emotional gain. Supporting Tibet is you have to be practically supporting Tibet by actions. Right. Just staying back and emotionally supporting will not help. So therefore, young Indians need to think about your own securities, your own national interests, and then look beyond and see what you can do to help Tibet. And the Tibet issue is unresolved and is going through such a traumatic time that even now we are talking about a cultural genocide. Even now we are talking about the existential threats under the Chinese influence. Now inside Tibet, there are colonial-style boarding schools which are being built in Tibet by the Chinese, which put up more than 1 million kids, Tibetan children, indoctrinated, right, by not letting them to speak and teach and learn Tibetan language and not being close to their parents, but they are politically indoctrinated and put up in the colonial-style boarding schools. We must be thinking that after British left India, the colonization has gone from the world. But the colonization has started in Asia by Asian countries like China. When the West goes back to the West, the East has started occupying their own neighbors. So China, we need to understand China. China being immediate now, immediate neighbor close to India, and many people consider China as being a threat. But somehow, the Chinese people and the Chinese culture is very much connected to India, the Buddhism. So I felt that Indians need to understand, because the India and China's relationship are not old. Only after China occupied Tibet, China became physically close to India. It started only 70 years back. But Tibet and India's relationship goes to millennia. We talk about our own history, our own origination of the king, connected to India. We have our own kingdom. We have our own civilizations. We have our own government. We have our own stamps, national anthems, flags, everything. But still, the world dominates with the power. The power speaks. And we think that, and we felt that the truth should be the one to speak, not the power. So therefore, the truth must prevail. And I hope that I'll not take much time. So we have, speakers lined up. So we'll have a question and answer sessions. So we'll have a good time after that. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Tenzin sir, for your informative address, and I'll be very sure that our respected participants will have many questions which we'll be having in the question and answer session. Next, we'll be moving to our keynote speaker of this session, Dr. Soumya Avasthi, who holds a PhD in religion and geopolitics. She has written many books, numerous articles in journals, magazines, and newspaper, both national and international. Her area of specialization is counter-terrorism, religious radicalization, and issues related to India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. Throughout her career, she has collaborated extensively with academic institutions and government agencies. Her latest book is India's Nuclear Titans, biographical tales, which I had the pleasure to read recently. I'll now like to invite her for her keynote address. Over to you, Soumya ma'am.
Thank you. Very good evening to everyone, and Gongdro Delek to my Tibetan friends here. I've learned it, so I thought I should try and practice speaking it as well. So greetings to everyone present here, and thank you to Red Lantern Analytica for inviting me. By my bio, you must have guessed it enough that I have zero understanding of, not zero, but like I'm just not very expert on it, but what I understand and I believe in, I will just reiterate here. And so I was asked to talk about the Tawang issue, where everybody has highlighted something, and very important parts. Information was shared, and how people think about the issue, everything is laid out. So I will not go too much into the historical background, just keep it a little bit of peripheral, that how I perceived and learned about the Tibet issue that has been going on for almost since 1950. But before doing that, I read somewhere this amazing statement made by an American political scientist called Charles Glazer. He says that the international conflict often arises because of greedy countries that have aggression and expansionist ideas. So when I read this, I instantly connected it to the Chinese attitude, and it's rightly said so, that they have a very aggressive and expansionist ideals, and that is the reason for all the turbulence in the region, the instability. And this elephant in the room is very difficult to address or have a single line of thought. We need to factor in a lot of critical aspects that are involved in it. So while we talk about the sensitivity of Tawang, I thought let's reflect a little bit on how the Tibetan cause has been viewed by the Indians from the beginning itself. And because I feel that in order to understand the quarrel between India and China, it is, and in with regard to Tibet, it is important to understand that what is the crux of the issue. And because the Tibet as such, as a state, as a country, sits between the heartland of these two countries, India and China, and the very nature of military presence around it makes it very important for us to reflect on the Tibet cause. And there have been several attempts on resolving these issues since the beginning. Since India got its independence from the British Raj, there have been several attempts that have been made by both the sides, and especially over Tibet issue. However, it has been of no respite to us. And beyond this being a conflict of over 130,000 square kilometers of territory, India and China have starkly opposite views on how they view the Tibet. India always looked at Tibet and continues to look at towards Tibet as a very important part of the history of both India and Tibet, because of the Buddhist connect that we share and the Buddhist link. And however, there have been certain ups and downs over a period of time, which unfortunately have paved way for the existing issues. But all said and done, I feel even in the past, even if we talk about the then Secretary General, Mr. Girija Shankar Bajpayee, and the Deputy Prime Minister Sardar Patel, they also believe that this issue of Tibet will continue to be a challenge between India and China, and hence it must be resolved at the earliest. But it was actually the inconsistencies of the Chinese which continued to bring delay in the progress. And ultimately, there were certain rationalities which were uh, accepted to say that, once this issue erupts, there will be many more floodgates which will be opened. So India has been taking cautious steps towards resolving the Tibet issue, and in the recent past, we have seen that how India's stand towards Tibet has changed and has become more strict and stringent. And that even though we have signed the 1954 agreement and we give the recognition that Tibet is part of the Chinese territory, but there is something that we have always marked at the international level also, that in the China has not honored the 1954 agreement, which was to give the Tibetan people their autonomy to run their governance, which wasn't given to given to the Tibetan population, and that has been always at the forefront of our statements since the time immemorial, actually. And in fact, the welcoming of Tibetan refugees into our country, as well as granting the political asylum to His Holiness Dalai Lama, has been part of this stand only, that because China has not fulfilled the promises that it has made, we had to take these steps. And India's core approach towards ensuring the autonomy of the Tibet region has been twofold. And because India has always been idealist in its thought from the beginning, we thought that if the Tibetans are given their autonomous status, then there are two things that can happen. One is that India and China may come out as two good partners in Asia who are ready to resolve the Stability Act in the region. But also it believes that bringing stability into Tibet will indirectly and directly bring security to India also, because at the same time, India is also was in fact threatened by the Chinese in the 50s and the 60s. And that is the reason that the cooperation and conflict has been back and forth between India and China. Post 1962 war, India in fact hardened its Tibetan policies and approach. And in 1963, India set up its Special Frontier Forces, which consisted of Tibetan refugees. We have trained them militarily to fight in the high altitude region. And it is also to ensure it's not something that we have a win-win in this. We also believe that given this kind of a training, in times to come, if there is any warlike situation, Tibetans are trained enough to guard their own borders as well, and wherein India will give their full-fledged support. And India has also assisted in the Dalai Lama in writing the constitution for Tibet in 1963, because I'm just trying to highlight that where do we stand in this whole chaos, and what is India's stand over it. India, in fact, from 2003 onwards, in its joint communique, has also been dropping the words or statements directly talking about Tibet or the One China policy, because we saw that China has not been standing on what they agreed in letter and spirit. So we had to take this hardening step. And since then, in our joint communiques, we have not actually mentioned Tibet word in fact once also. And it is interesting to see how India-China relations or India-China stands over Tibet has a direct implication on Indian state of Arunachal Pradesh, because we all know that China thinks that and interestingly, another point here is that it is only the 2% of the land which China is really worried about, and it is making fuss over it, because it understands the significance of the land that it is talking about, the question of Tawang and Arunachal Pradesh, because of the symbol of identity, sovereignty, freedom, and access to valuable resources and geostrategic position. Because in case of Beijing, it is its determination is the symbolic and historical significance which is associated with the Tawang monastery in Arunachal Pradesh, and Beijing believes that once China gets claim over the region, it will legalize its control over Buddhist Tibet and gain control of over 1.2 million square kilometers of the Tibetan autonomous region, which is 1/8 of the land which is which China claims to be part of the Greater China. So it is interesting to see that how its policies in Arunachal is not a standalone policy, but is directly implicating towards its policy in Tibet. So India has made it very clear in its official statements that we support the autonomous region and not really the Buddhist or the Chinese occupation, quote and unquote. And that is why we have not been mentioning the word Tibet and One China policy in our official documents. In fact, in 2014, we invited the Prime Minister Lobsang Sangay, who is also called the President of the Tibetan government in exile, to a government event. And then in 2016, 2017, His Holy Dalai Lama visited Taiwan and Arunachal Pradesh, which was a sore in the eyes of the Chinese, because they couldn't accept presence of the Dalai Lama in Tawang. Even in during the Doklam standoff, India permitted the Sangay was allowed to unfurl the Tibetan flag in the near the Pengongso Lake in Ladakh. So these are some of the steps which India, despite signing the 1954 agreement, which cannot be refuted at the moment, has been making its attempt to showcase its support for the Tibetan cause. And these are some of the ways in which they have been doing it. In 2014, the Ministry of Home Affairs came up with this interesting document, which I recently discovered while preparing for this talk, which is called as Tibetan Rehabilitation Policy, which was produced in consultation with the Central Tibetan Relief Committee to address the problems of the Tibetan refugees. And through this document, Government of India has proposed to the state governments in various parts of the country to extend the benefits of various governmental programs and development schemes to the refugees, like the MNREGA, Indira Awas Yojana, Rajiv Awas Yojana, National Rural Livelihood Mission, and several other National Health Mission. So there have been several steps that the Indian government has taken from time to time to show that India stands for the cause. And at the same time, in the during their map, what they keep mentioning about the maps here and there, we have given out our official statements. And at the same time, India has been highlighting the human rights issues that the Tibetans in Tibet are facing due to presence of the Chinese in the region. And despite claiming that we will give them autonomous powers to certain degree of autonomy in the framework. They haven't done so. So the government of India has acknowledged this challenge, and in various forums it has allowed this sentiment to come out. And even in the as we discuss it today, even we found that many government, like the news agencies, have highlighted the human rights violation that takes place in Tibet by the Chinese. And there is this whole identity, how the extermination of Tibetan identity is taking place in Tibet. So what can India do apart from doing such, showing such gestures for the people of Tibet in refugee and in exile, and also for the people who are present in Tibet? In my small understanding, I feel that India must come out with this, we should give this rebuttal to the Chinese the way they do about this map game. We must also come out with a clear map, and we should start circulating it not just in India but also internationally, because it was only in August 2023, this year, that China, through the mapping of India, Republic of China survey, has come out with a standard map which is showing several parts of the region under it. So there has to be something on the same line that needs to be done, wherein we just don't talk about the Arunachal Pradesh issue, but also highlight the Tibetan cause and show the Tibetan map in geography and terrain the way it is supposed to be historically. So this is something that I feel India must do, and because we have seen Indian foreign policy taking a very powerful and not so submissive as it used to be in the past. The stand has changed. The risk-taking capacity has increased, and we have become stronger in our determination. So it is time that we also showcase something like this, which which gives much more confidence to the people of Tibet in exile, and also the people in Tibet, present in Tibet. And at the same time, I feel that India and the government in exile, Tibetan government in exile, can also do something comprehensive agreement sort of a thing. It is just a scholarly interpretation that I'm drawing here, and not informed by any government agencies at the moment. So I feel that if the two sides can come together and lay out certain more nuances of these details, then maybe it can help the Tibetan government in exile to have a better policy towards how to go about their mission and accomplish them with the support of our country. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am, for your informative address on this topic. Next, we'll be moving to our next speaker, Dr. Tawang Dorji, who is a researcher from Tibet Policy Institute. He has received his doctoral studies in strategic and international relations from the University of Madras. He is currently a research fellow at the Tibet Policy Institute, researching upon Tibet and the Himalayas. His research areas lie in India-China border conflict over the Indo-Tibet border, military and infrastructure developments in Tibet, Chinese strategic thinking towards Tibet, and South Asia and traditional knowledge systems in the Himalayan regions. I'll now like to welcome him for his address. Over to you, Dr. Dorji.
Thank you very much. May I audible?
Yes, you are perfectly audible. Please
Yeah,
go ahead.
thank you. Thank you very much for having me here. And in fact, most of my points are already covered by the previous speakers, so I don't have to say much about because and also, like, I have 10 minutes, so 10 minutes not sufficient for someone who does research for the topic for last 7 or 8 years. So moreover, today's session is more on the dialogue rather than academic sort of the conferences and seminars. So I put more focus on the brainstorming. The brainstorm is much actually needed to discuss the issues related to today's topic. In fact, in our conscious, most of the actually answers flow in the open space, but the problem is that we are not asking the questions. Therefore, we are not getting the answers actually. So for that, I would like to throw some research questions on the today's topic, rather than go through the boring sort of presentation. As I mentioned that most of my points are already covered by the previous speakers. So I have some the kind of the package of the brainstorming topics that we have to think about in near future when it comes to the Tibet issue in the China relations. So and for the last 40-50 years that the China has keep irritating India on irritating India over the Tawang. Why China keep irritating over the Tawang? And what are the geopolitical significance of the Tawang over the Sino-Indian dispute over the Indo-Tibet border in the Eastern Himalaya? And more importantly, why China keep waging cartography war against India over the Tawang? And why China keep irritating India in terms from ranging for the sport related to the Dalai Lama's visit to Tawang? And what the Tawang Tibet relation, historical relation does matter to China over the India when it comes to the territorial claim, and why India worries about China's infrastructure development next to the Arunachal Pradesh, moreover in Tibet. So, and more importantly, what does India worry about, and in all these issues? So. In fact, all these cautions actually come after soon after China's occupation of Tibet, and moreover, all these cautions related to the China's expansionist policy towards the Himalaya and South Asia, and all these cautions are related to the new great game in the Himalayas, which started by the China for expanding its sphere of influence in Southeast Asia. So all these cautions are also related to the resources that enrich in Eastern Himalaya. So in order to understand all these cautions, actually, the geopolitical importance of Tibet is key to understand. So therefore, we have to focus on the geopolitical importance to Tibet. I'm not saying because I'm Tibetan and I do research on the particular topic. It matters still with India's security and national interest. So I will leave here for our further discussion, and I will stop here because I am the last speaker. If I go more details, so I think the people will get more bored. So I will stop here, and I prefer to get more cautions related to the issues that the brainstorm. So with this, I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And with that, we'll be opening this session to a question and answer session. I'll now open the chat for our participants of this session. And yeah, the chat is now open. People can post their questions. And Kritika, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
You had one question, I believe. You can ask it till the participants are posting their questions in the chat. Thank you.
Yes, I have one question. My question is to Tenzin Lekshel, sir. So, seeing the past actions in by CCP with His Holiness the Panchen Lama, there are chances that CCP will try to project someone, as the next Dalai Lama, try to impose someone as the next His Holiness 15th Dalai Lama. What will be your advice in such scenario to India and to the Tibetan diaspora to counter this challenge?
Thank you, Kritika, for the very, I think this question is always comes. And if you look at the Chinese recent white paper on Tibet, now in fact, they stopped calling Tibet as Tibet now. They changed into Siang. And let me also tell my Indian friends in the media that over the recent past, intermediates also follow the Chinese instructions by using Siang. So please don't use Siang to the intermediates. Tibet means Tibet. And China's connotation of using Siang is only to disintegrate Tibet, right, to divide Tibet, and to disown Tibet. So therefore, what we talk about Tibet is something different, which we'll share in some other moments. Now, on this relevant topic, in the white paper, the recent white paper, right, it just simply wrote in one sentence, which could skip the eyes of the people, normal people, right? Only one sentence, but three important issues which they have made at stake. First thing, they said the reincarnation of Panchen Lama and His Holiness Dalai Lama has to be born within China. Has to be recognized, second one, has to be recognized, comma, has to be recognized by using the golden urn, comma, and has to be authorized by the central government. So the three things put up in one sentence. But three things are not actually Buddhist traditions, right? So therefore, China is pursuing such things over the years, right? Just for the sake of political needs, for their own political interests, they are using this Buddhism in their favor. So they are going against the basic traditions of the Tibetan Buddhism. So His Holiness all through the time has said that if the Tibet issue remains unresolved, it will not be born in Tibet. This is number one. His Holiness said. Now it is about His Holiness reincarnation. So who has the authority? Only His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, has the authority. Nobody else. Nobody has the authority except His Holiness to choose where he wants to be in the future. So His Holiness has already made a statement in 2011, which makes very clear that the authority lies on His Holiness alone, nobody else. And only after reaching 90, then he will decide and look into what he should do the next. So still we have 2 years to go. His Holiness is 88 now. So His Holiness says that after going to 90, then only His Holiness think what should be done. So we cannot preemptively talk about those issues also, right? And the second thing is, using golden urn, which they claim that this is the only legitimate traditions which China claims, it's also not truthful to the traditions. This Dalai Lama is the 14th in existence, not the first. So among the Tibetans, we have three great Dalai Lama. This is the 14th. Among the Tibetans, we have three great Dalai Lamas. Number fifth, the fifth Dalai Lama, 13th Dalai Lama, and the present 14th Dalai Lama. People recognize them as the great, right? So all these three were not being chosen by using the golden urn. The golden urn techniques were being somewhat kind of suggestions by Qianlong in 1792. And the tradition of reincarnation of Dalai Lama goes beyond 1792, right? So the present one was not being chosen by using the golden urn, which China claims this is the only legitimate, right, techniques, right? The 13th, the previous one also not being used for golden urn. So golden urn was not the common, the most common, right, the traditions of recognizing the Dalai Lama. Now, the number three, it has to be, China's claim that it has to be authorized by the Chinese government. It is also false. It is not truthful. So the 14, all through the time, they have not been authorized by the Chinese government. Tibet remained as independent before 1959. And the present one was born in 1935, before China occupied Tibet. And there's no way that China can authorize the authority on the reincarnation of the Dalai Lama. So for the Tibetans, we don't have any worry. It was China's mere political tactics that they're using for the reincarnation, for the Buddhism, right? And therefore, His Holiness also says that many times, that His Holiness is not in hurry, right? When His Holiness is not in hurry, why China is hurry in claiming the reincarnation of the 14th Dalai Lama? Another thing now, China has been a hypocrite. The 15th one, the future, they were longing to authorize. But the 14th, the present one, they are trying to de-associate him. They are disowning him, right? Calling him as demon, calling him by different demeaning names like demon and the wolves and monk's robe and all these things, right? And His Holiness is a pure compassionate soul, right? Even now, His Holiness thoughts about the oneness of humanity, right? Helping the Chinese people for the future, for all the entire humanities. So His Holiness, because of his holistic, right, resolutions for the Tibetan community or the Tibetan issues or the conflicts, but China is not any way that they are very close to His Holiness. So the present one they disown, and the future one they want to own it. So it's not going to happen, right? So therefore, for this question, whatever China is doing right now to legitimize their authority on His Holiness is completely political in nature. They are not religious people. I'm not talking about the people. The party do not believe in religion. But the party were the one who were claiming that Dalai Lama should be next in China. Dalai Lama should be recognized by Golden Urn, and His Holiness should be also being. So they live in a hypocritical world, but they themselves are hypocritic, and it's not going to happen. So therefore, I think we don't have to worry about that. The only thing what we do is let His Holiness decide where he should be born, right? So therefore, this question keeps on coming, but we Tibetans, we have a firm belief that His Holiness, what His Holiness says over the years, has been very much truthful, right? So therefore, the ball lies on China now. His Holiness says that if Tibet issue is unresolved, he'll be not born in Tibet. So Tibet issue has to be resolved first. Before claiming the Dalai Lama, China has to resolve the Tibet issue or the Tibetan conflict, which is a long-standing. Before resolving the conflict, China cannot in any way have the authority over His Holiness incarnation. It's a plain and simple answer. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much for that answer, sir. So, my next question, my question is to you, Ayanjit, sir. So you know that we all know that PRCs always like to control the narrative of Tibet, and it's also famous for meddling with the free media and arts. And in 2011, we had a movie, Indian movie, Rockstar, where in one of the music videos, some parts were blurred because people were shown, waving flags of a free Tibet. So, as you have been in media, like, how do you see this issue? If you can elaborate on that, sir.
Sir, you are
So,
muted.
you were unmute. You have to unmute.
Can you hear me now, Shalini? Yeah. Thanks for your question. Well, the first thing is when you're talking about free media, so to say, China can't boast of it. So from that perspective, the first thing that comes, as you said, from a cultural perspective as well, what they did with that particular movie, I still remember. Now, the thing is that they have ways of transgressing those issues in a different format throughout the, because they tend to bring it forth not through their traditional news outlets, but through different people, individuals and organizations in different parts of the world, so that they can send the message across effectively and without showing that they are themselves doing it sometimes. So those are also issues which are in the world media right now. And but at the end of the day, the cat has come out of the bag. They can't hold it for too long, because it's no longer the days when we used to be just relegated to television and newspapers. That's it. Because social media now plays a very important role, and that's the reason why. Well, they have stopped everything operating in their own country. So you can't boast of something and argue about something which you don't even practice in your own country. So forget about anything to do with the way they want to come out with. They would definitely go down to they can take any way to some way or the other to put forward what their argument is, rather than, because they know that if they go through the traditional way, some people would believe in it, some people won't believe. But to maximize that belief, quote unquote, stuff, they tend to kind of do it through different ways in different parts of the world. And I have tons of examples also, which I will not be able to cite here because of security reasons. But there are examples whereby they have taken different ways of coming out with stuff which is unethical, because that's something which I would term the word unethical here, because that's something which does not befit a media organization, be it from any part of the globe. So yes, I think they should not talk about media when they don't have a free media themselves in their country.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for that answer, sir. We do have a few questions in the chat box addressed to respective speakers. I would like to just announce them. The first question is to you, Soumya ma'am. It says, as you have mentioned that India's stance on Tibet has transformed with time after Tibetans were denied their autonomy. Do you think there is a chance that further sour relations with Beijing can see official change in India, where Tibet is more vocally mentioned in policy papers?
Yeah, this will be my really wishful thinking at the moment, but I really wish that this happens, because it's high time that we become more and more. We are already progressing towards it. That once upon a time we were not, during the time of Nehru and so on and so forth, we were quite timid, you can say, because we were newly independent country. We had other challenges. We faced 62 war. Before that, we faced the other skirmishes with Pakistan, and so on and so forth. India was standing alone, and there was no international support given to India at that moment. So we have traveled a long distance in these 75 years, where our policies have become stringent and is more India-centric than being thinking on the idealistic and peaceful coexistence line. Despite India at the present also saying Vasudhaiv Kutumbakam, believes that when time comes, India is ready to take on bulls by its horns. So yes, if there are further sour relationships between India and China, then you just don't know. Maybe this day will come when India will have a more categorical stand on Tibet, and it will come out in our policy papers. And we at the moment, maybe our policies with China on Tibet or otherwise on various border issues are towing the softer, not really softer, but maybe they are very calculative. They are trying to go by the Chinese behavior and attitude. So if Chinese attitude changes towards us, then we will not be reluctant or hesitant in bringing any change into our stand. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. The next question is for Tenzing Lakshay, sir. This is asked by Smriti. She's a research scholar at Jamia Millia University. She is working on Tibetan identity, and she would like to know if Tibetans are original natives of Tawang or the tribal communities living there, or both. She would like to know that.
See, Tibetans normally, we have Tibetan people, right? And Tibetans. Now, interestingly, China, over the last 2-3 years, they don't even mention Tibetan people in their official documents. Now, Tibet has disappeared from the official communication, right, and the documents. Now, the Tibetan people has also been disappeared along with that. So, for the Tibetans, yes, Tibetan race, when you go to Tibetan race and for people, but it has so many connections with, not just with Tawang, but all over the Himalayan borders. There are so much of affinities, so much similarities, so much of connections, and there are lots of exchange and discourse happens all through the centuries. It's not just about Tawang. So therefore, there are things that sometimes I felt that when we talk about Tibet issue to the Indian masses, Tibet seems like far away because like there's a giant, mighty Himalaya, right? And then people thought, oh, Tibet beyond Himalaya, right? So now you don't have to go beyond Himalaya. First thing is that, do the Indians really think and understand about Himalayan people? How many Indian people, common people, strategic communities, medias, understands about people of Ladakh, culture of Ladakh, traditions of Ladakh, not just Ladakh, Himachal, Bhutan, Sikkim, Tawang, and all Arunachal and all these things. Not many people understands. Not many people still. There are issues of people being called as Chingy and all these things. Even in, right, they are still going on. So therefore, Tibet is far beyond. So even though Tibet is very much relevant, first thing first, I think that you need to understand within yourself. The Indians need to understand what is within yourself. India is so diverse, but there is the uniqueness of diverse. There's good things about being diverse, right? And once you know about Himalaya, then I think that India will be able to know more about that, right? So therefore, yes, history says many things in the past, and past, as I said, is forgone. But there are things that we have relations with Tawang monasteries. But in 1904, 1905, right, they were changed in the histories. Right. And all through the time we've been saying that Arunachal Pradesh and Tawang are all under the sovereign state of India. Right. So therefore, for us, we've been saying that Arunachal is a part and parcel of India. Right. But there is one anecdote. Long time back, I used to talk to the Tawang people, right, over the phone about Tibetan support movements, right? And the mainland people try to say that, oh, we have to go to Tawang to show solidarities for Tibet. But people in Tawang told me that, no, you don't have to come to Tawang because we already know about Tibet and we have been committed for the Tibetan cause. Rather than coming to Tawang, you should go to the mainland, to the cities, to the towns where the Tibet issue was not known. Right. So therefore, culturally, historically, there are so much connections with the people of Tawang who are members. Right. So I think I put up this thing very clear. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. We have a last question for Tsewang, sir. So, since you research on Tibet, what are your observations about the social fabric of Tibetans living in Tibet who are subjected to the Sinicization by re-education, forced labor, and where Tibetans are denied their culture, language, and identity? That's
Yeah.
the question.
Yes. Thank you for the question. And before I go to my question, I would like to speak a little more about the questions which raised to the Ms. Tenzin Lechila from okay, forget it from. So regarding to the Tawang or Tibetan sort of these things, since because I wrote 2 or 3 papers on the historical relation between Tawang and Tibet, I think I will try to give us little information about what is Tawang and what is Tawang's relation with the Tibet. I think that would be more important to understand the Tawang translation that we discussed today evening. And yes, the people in Tawang are more particularly, you can call as the Tibetan stocks, but they are not Tibetan actually. You can call it the Tibetan stocks. The reason why I'm saying the Tibetan stock is that we have to trace back to the history. So when we say about history, we have to trace the history from 17th century to the 20th century, then 7th century to the 17th century. It's very long history that associated with the Tibet relation with the Monyul, that is we are talking about, and the people who are living in that particular area is a member, and right now the members are actually is the small portion of the member population are right now under the Chinese occupation, that is in Tibet, and Sona member and the Merag member. It's right now so-called it is in the Tibet autonomous region next to the Tawang, and the 80% of the members actually are living in Arunachal Pradesh. So not exactly in Tawang. The Tawang is one of the very important actually the place, and it is also the spiritual and the political center of the main area. So that's why we focus on the Tawang actually. And in terms of the members, actually, there are different types of the members among the member community also, but we forget it about, what are all these types. But better, I think if you have more interest, you have to, I'm not promoted my article, but you have to go through the article that I wrote about, and you can see in internet. So 3 or more articles is there. The more you want to know about, then you have to go through my research paper, and it's going to be published in one of the this peer review journal. So if you need, you can contact me, and I will send you send you to personal. And why Tawang matter is that, before signing the Shimla Convention, the Tawang was a political center and spiritual center of the main region, which is administered and occupied, or you can see the occupied in terms of the political administration by the Tibetan government. I'm talking about before signing the Shimla Convention, that is 1914. So 1914, after the signing Shimla Convention, the Tibetan authority has legally ceded the Tawang to the British India. That is how actually it is, but it's very complicated, but somehow you have to go through that, because China was keep claiming about Tawang is because of these reasons. So that is the reason why China keep claiming about Arunachal Pradesh, and China has denied the visas who came from the Arunachal Pradesh. So there has a historical link between that. Even in 1960, during the China-India border talk, actually, China has released the paper which was actually issued by the Tibetan government of the Ganden Bhutan in 1680. That we used to call the 1680 edict, which is issued by the 5th Dalai Lama. Then the lecturer talk about 3 great Dalai Lama, right? So it was issued by the 5th Dalai Lama. In the date was 1680. So that is 1680 edict. So that edict was used by the Chinese to manipulate the history about Tibet-Taiwan relation, to play with the India. So that was very important to understand the historical insights of the historical relation between Taiwan and Tibet. So this is one thing. When we talk about people, it has very long history. Actually, we have to go back to the 7th century. and also some of the because when I study about the Tawang Tibet relation, so the earliest actually the oral history you can go back, like 127 BC, that the first king of the Tibet. So you have to go back to that. So they have some taste of the members and men. So then when second, like when it comes to the seventh century, so the members it's already there in the Tibetan history, and then so if you look at the most of the hydrographies and the travel logs and so many Tibetan sacred texts, you can see you can see and you can get the information about like how Tibet relation with the place that what we use call about Tawang, because Tawang is popular because because of Tawang monastery, because Tawang monastery, as like initially someone already mentioned about Tawang monastery, because Tawang monastery was built in 1680 by the Merag Lodroe Gyamtso, and he was one of the best, the student of the fifth Dalai Lama. So he belongs to the Gelugpa tradition of the Tibetan Buddhism. So the Tawang monastery became the political and administration center of the Tibetan government of the Ganden Namgyal. So through the Tawang monastery, so the Tibetan government has ruled, and Tibetan government has administered the different zones and different administration in the main region from Tawang to till the Akung Dala. In right now, Akung Dala is somewhere in between Assam and Arunachal border. Somewhere in between, you can say Balungbung. If you are from this place, you must know about the west, right? So there's a very rich history about it. Like it's not Tawang is something a name, but beyond that, there are so many, texts. There are so many archives. There are so many narratives, and very interesting in terms of taxation, in terms of culture, how it interacts with the Tibet, and in taxation also, like since we don't have much time, so I will not go through very detail about, maybe I will get chance in near future, so I will give more information about taxation. And it's very actually fascinating, the still that culture is still keep intact, though it is in India actually. So like in put a nutshell, and like initially it was part of the Tibet before signing the Shimla Convention. After signing the Shimla Convention, it was legally ceded by the Tibetan Authority to the British India. But right now, what China says is that China has misinterpreted, manipulated the history, and said that China says that Tibet was part of the China since many centuries. So that's why like China has a right to claim over the Tawang. In fact, it was not. I'm not saying because I'm Tibetan, and because why I'm saying is that because many people say that because you are Tibetan, so always you are supporting for that. It's not, because I'm researcher, so I do research, and I have a historical archive, sort of the proof that I have. So through these materials, so it clearly says that there is no any the Chinese political intervention before signing the Shimla Convention. So that means like I think through that, so Menul, Mempa, and then its relation with Tibet is very interesting. But sad thing is, it's not sad actually. The the limitation thing is that before the 19th century, all the texts are written in the Tibetan. So the many of the researchers in India and abroad, they they doesn't know about Tibetan language. Therefore, you don't have access actually. But this, as I mentioned to my talk, answers already flow in the open space. But thing is that nobody raised the question. So this is actually very important to understand. So right now, currently, I'm working on the paper regarding on this things soon, and soon it's finished. So I will share through the online and some other channels. I think that is the brief, the discussion on the question which raised to the Lexila, since it's related to my research. So I just interfere for that, and then the caution that it comes to the Sinization of the Tibetan Buddhism, or the labor, forced labor, and then I think it's also related to the boarding school, and that issues in right now Tibet. And in fact, yes, because all these the policies are aimed to eradicate the Tibetan identity, Tibetan tradition, Tibetan civilization at all. Because, and I will throw you here very important 2 points, is that first is that China wants the Tibet, that is the land. China wants, because it's rich in the natural resources. It's strategically very important to expand. The China's expansionist policy, but China doesn't want the Tibetan language. China doesn't want the Tibetan people. Therefore, China tried to eradicate the Tibetan identity. So for that, the education and the monastery is key to understand. It's the backbone of the Tibetan tradition, the Tibetan way of life. Therefore, China tried to eradicate. So far, it's not. And more importantly, there are in Tibet, there are two types of police actually in the Tibetan society. In Tibet, there are two types of police. One is the Chinese the police, and another thing is the moral police. So that is like related to the Tibetan Buddhism. So the Tibetan, most of the Tibetan inside Tibet, they follow the moral police rather than the law enforcement police, which is imposed, or imposed by the Chinese authority. In terms, it comes to the legitimacy. In nutshell, the Tibetan people inside Tibet, they reject the Chinese legitimacy over Tibet. Therefore, they though like their bodies are in the Tibet, they are living in Tibet, but their mind and heart is always there in India, to the His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And also the Tibetan people in Tibet, they regard the India as a Gyaka Pakbe Yu, is the holy land actually. Whether they've been here in India or not, but the Tibetan people inside Tibet, they reward this much, thing to India and Dalai Lama. So, and then these two, that the policy actually is implemented during the China's Tibet Work Forum, especially in 2020, and during the China's Tibet Work Forum 6 and 7. So Xi Jinping himself actually dictate this policy to eradicate the Tibetan, identity, Tibetan Buddhism, because as I mentioned that these two are backbone of the Tibetan survival, Tibetan culture. Therefore, China doesn't want all these things, so they have imposed so many activities, so many schemes, so many programs to eradicate day by day. And more importantly and more critically in the present situation in Tibet is that China has imposed colonial boarding school sort of activity, and then they try to minimize the number of monks in the Tibetan monastery. Its idea is that they try to, as I mentioned before, is that they try to eradicate, they try to to remove all these identity in Tibet. For that, China want the Tibetan, nobody will against the China. If China wants to make Tibetans into the China or the Chinese. So for that reason, China do all these things. I think it also like what I'm saying here is that so right now I'm telling is that what happened in Tibet is actually we keep saying that what happening inside Tibet is happening in the Himalaya also, right? No, in terms of geopolitics, in terms of culture, in terms of all these things. And the serious thing is that China is constructing so many border different villages next to the Indian borders. Actually, for me, this is very important in terms of India's security and India's defense. So the Tibet, China has occupied Tibet for the last 60, 50 years. And so we are sharing the experience to the Indian audience that what happened in Tibet is happening to the Himalaya and India also. And I think so. So I keep telling to my Indian friends is that in next 20, 50 years, so today we are talking about Memba, Ladakhi, and so many, the Himalayan culture, something like that. If we are not care enough, if we are not care enough to stop the Chinese influence in the Himalayan regions, so in the last 50, 60 years, so these Himalaya regions slowly and gradually turned into the Chinese tongue that is maintaining. So today people are talking Nepali in Nepal, but maybe next 20, 50 years, so people might be talk in the Mandarin, that is Chinese language. So that might be that kind of situation might be the coming in near future. So that is very important to us to understand, not only about Tawang, but it's somehow related to the the Himalayan regions. I think, yeah.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, sir, for the answer, or I should say, Tukjetha. Now I would like to call Shalini for the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Kritika. Hello, everyone. I would quickly like to say that it was truly an honor and privilege to have been a part of this wonderful 3-day conference, aptly named the Siang Dialogue 1.0. We discussed a plethora of important topics ranging from the strategic importance of the northeast region of India, the mountainous terrain here, and the intricacies of it, the dynamic Act East India policy of India, the challenges posed by the Communist Party of in China, problems like the Tibetan issue and other such problems, their solutions, and the way forward. The conference successfully panned out via 3 amazing sessions conducted on the 8th, 9th, and 10th December, respectively. On behalf of Red Lantern Analytica, I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to all the esteemed speakers who graced this conference by their comprehensive analysis, their brilliant insights, and their ingenious intellect. The first session of the dialogue was the Namsai Note, which has panel members such as Sri Ninong Ering as the chief patron, Ms. Namrita Hasija as the keynote speaker, and the moderator. We had Dr. Shripanna Pathak as the chief guest for the session and Dr. Rajiv Nayan as the guest of honor. And we also had keynote speaker as Dr. Shripanna Barua, who enlightened us with her invaluable insights. The Namsai Note started this session, this conference, and it was a beautiful session, which was followed by the second session, which was the Lohit's Longitude, where we discussed much more about ASEAN, Indo-Pacific, the emergence of Northeast as a favorable trade hotspot, the engagement with Southeast and South Asian countries, and other such topics. The chief patron for this session was Sri Sujit Kumar, who is a member of Rajya Sabha. The chief guest was Sri Ajay Dutt. The guest of honor was Major Amit Bansal, who shared his multifaceted viewpoints regarding the Northeast and the China angle. And the keynote speaker was Dr. J. Jagannathan Sir, who put an end to the second session with his elaborate remarks. And coming to the last but not the least, the third session of this whole conference called the Tawang Translation, which was beautiful, very detailed, very insightful. And I would like to thank our chief guest for the session, Dr. Ayanjit Sen, for his remarkable address. A sincere thank you to Ms. Tenzing Lekshe for gracing this session as the guest of honor, and my heartfelt thanks to both our keynote speaker, Dr. Soumya Avasthi and Dr. Tswang Doji, for their distinguished and valuable insights. These 3 sessions of the Siang Dialogue 1.0 were truly enriching and full of intriguing facts. I'm pretty sure all the participants must be enlightened and must have a lot of information now, which we did not have earlier. I would like to once again thank all our speakers who have beautifully added to the glory of this event. The unmatchable knowledge and zeal of all our speakers truly made this session a grand success. I would like to thank each and every participant for their commendable enthusiasm, and a big kudos to the entire team of Red Lantern Analytica for organizing this event for this conference and the dedication put in by all our members. I would like to give out a big thanks to our respected founder and mentor Abhishek sir for his constant support, and he inspires us to work hard every day. And with this, the conference comes to an end. It was a captivating 3-day journey. It was a lot of hard work, so I thank each and every one with all my heart. And I hope that Siang Dialogue 2.0 is formulated soon. With this, we would like to bring this session to an end if we have the permission of all our speakers.